Paul is confounded. He's perplexed because there's the church at Corinth. They confessed Christ. They became believers on the basis of the resurrected Christ. That's what distinguished Christianity from all other religions. And yet here in verse 12, we see Paul writing to the church and says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 12, "Now if Christ is preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead?" For Paul, there's a conflict. There's a contradiction. You supposedly say that you're a Christian on the basis of what you understand about the resurrected Christ, that he is dwelling in you, that he's brought about this new creation in Christ Jesus, that you've been born again, that you're a new creation in Christ Jesus. And yet, even though that is the basis and the foundation of your supposed conversion, there's some of you who both in belief and confession, in practice and confession, you don't really believe. And so for Paul, it's a contradiction of confession. You have to really appreciate the context of what Paul is dealing with, the much larger issue. Well, this is the largest issue, but other issues that Paul has been dealing with leading up to this. Because Paul has been dealing with dysfunction in the church at Corinth. They are being absorbed into the culture where they're starting to look like everybody else. They're losing their distinctiveness. And Paul has had to deal with some critical issues. He's had to deal with matters of conscience in the church. People are not rightly exercising their freedom in Christ. They are using it as a license to do whatever they want to do. In particular, on the issue of meat that was sacrificed to idols. And the question, is that okay to eat that meat that has been sacrificed to false God? Paul understands in freedom in Christ, I can eat that if I want to, but because I recognize that there are weaker brethren around me, that there's weaker people that are not yet where I'm at, my freedom in Christ is not a license to do as I please, so I'll refrain from that so that I won't drag down my weaker brethren. This is an issue in the church. It's an issue in the church today. Those who flaunt their freedom in Christ, some sort of advanced spirituality, instead of embracing the responsibility that goes with that and exercising it properly. Paul's dealing with sexual issues in the church. Those who are practicing their sexuality outside the design of God. Those who are practicing sexual immorality outside of marriage. And even those in marriage, there is dysfunction. Some are withholding intimacy from their spouses under the guise of being so much spiritual that this is part of my spiritual experience, withholding intimacy from one another. Paul refutes all of that. There's sexual issues in the church. Immorality and false practice. And then there's issues of worship that Paul has had to deal with. Instead of corporate worship being this collective expression to the honor and glory of God, now that individuals are taking corporate worship and trying to make it into their own private little playground. And for each one of these, what has happened, Paul says you have lost sight of what the resurrection is desiring to accomplish in you to get you away from that selfishness. And yet when it comes to matters of conscience, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to worship, you're just doing whatever you want to do. And so for Paul, in his mind, the resurrection is the remedy to all of that. Paul's premise is that the reason these are issues, the reasons we're dealing with this, is because you don't really believe in the resurrection. Because if you really believed it, Paul is convinced, if you really believed in the resurrection, these issues and these kind of issues would resolve themselves. Paul is beckoning us, the church then, the church today. We need to reclaim the resurrection, the significance of the resurrection, the centrality of the resurrection, and what that means for our life on a daily basis. Not just in our intellectual beliefs, what we say we believe, but we need to reclaim the resurrection and see how it impacts our life on a daily basis.